Hi all. Today we're going to use some of the economic tools that we've looked at to think about the imposition of 50% tariffs by the US government on about 20 billion of goods from Canada. At first, there's a little bit of simple arithmetic. Clearly, those 20 billion of goods are going to cost consumers one way or another in the States 30 billion. And 10 billion of tax will be collected at the border, at the toll booth, on those particular goods. If their barcode comes up, 50% tariff, and to import that, you've got to pay the tariff. So the US Treasury goes up by 10 billion. And so the US Treasury has 10 billion more to spend. Well, that doesn't go very far, does it? What are you going to buy with that? It's hard to say. As an objective in itself, clearly, if revenue raising was the objective, then a tweak to taxes would be a more direct way of raising revenue. So we can assume this is not about raising revenue, and inevitably, if this was any other country, we have plenty of examples from history. This is where you need to deviate from the mathematics to look at history, and not ancient Greece or anything. You can look at Iran. You can look at Latin American countries putting tariffs to protect fledgling domestic industries. There are plenty of examples, even among the current family of nations. In terms of output and trade, in the US, you could expect some modest input substitution, but the goods targeted appear to be goods like cement and potash. Maybe there could be some substitution. In terms of exchange rates, as I say, the numbers are fairly modest, so there's sort of marginal upward pressure on the US dollars. In terms of Canada, this is a zero-sum game, and that Canada now has a surplus of goods. Canada is going to the market, it's got a surplus, it's producing these goods, and it needs to clear the market, so it must find itself other customers. And for 20 billion of goods sounds a lot, but in the context of world trade, it clearly isn't. Canada has some sort of revenue impacts in that they sort of lose export duty value. They might have to spend on sort of industrial subsidies to keep the industries moving. And there may be, in terms of output, there may be a contraction and layoffs. and again, because the numbers are fairly modest, there might be some downward pressure on the Canadian dollar due to lower export receipts. When we think of our equation of aggregate demand, we can see where that's going to show up in GDP. So we can see some impact on GDP and GDP per capita of this specific action, which was announced today. Inevitably, subject to the courts, I mean, in economies which have less robust institutions, this is rent-seeking, and this is using the state power to seek rent. With the tools that we have, we can see this is an attempt, even if you look at a simplistic supply and demand graph, this is an attempt to corner some of the sort of producer and consumer surplus which US citizens have been enjoying. So it's kind of a tax. If the tariffs don't raise as much revenue as the surplus that's lost, it's described as a deadweight loss. So it serves no one. It's not even a zero-sum gain. It's just a loss. And for this reason, tariffs we have institutions, or have had institutions since the Second World War, directed at tariffs and aimed at increasing international trade, expanding the market, and maintaining a progressive economy. People aren't asking for miracles. They're simply asking for a progressive economy. And even politicians who deliver that, recently in the UK, there was political change. And you can't really say that was economically driven when you look at the numbers as an economist does, and our sort of indicators in the House of Commons library. There's nothing there that would make you say, oh, there's an urgent case for political change. So this, there's a couple of misapprehensions. Who's writing these tariff checks? Are the governments of other countries writing the checks? Well, no, they're not. The importer writes the check to the US Treasury, and ultimately the consumer pays in the form of higher prices. The nature of the goods targeted are such that the impact is felt by millions. It's spread across. So the thought is that they may not even notice a rise in prices, for example, in their washing machines, or and so on. It's this sort of border toll booth has a very long history, and if we go back now through, back to the time of Adam Smith, when we were getting big changes, things starting to move technologically, big population moves, and of course, the more people you have, the more chance and the more people you're able to sustain and educate, and give good health and defend, the more chance you are of getting technological innovation. Even if that technological innovation is only coming about as a result of competition with other powers, or the need to defend a particular border. So it's not. It's always been an artificial bottleneck. It's a discretionary artificial bottleneck, and it kind of not only has an economic gain, it has a political gain. It's part of politicians, particularly if you think in terms of the head of state of a country. They can gather political power from this sort of muscular activity, but behind that you have the scope for kleptocracy. And kleptocracy, it literally means ruled by thieves. And a case study here really is the mining industry, and the puzzle that is, for example, the Congo. The Congo has massive resources. It should be a rich country. It's not, in terms of per capita. And, for long decades, this rent from the mining companies, it's had to go in terms of, because Congo is, it doesn't have great transport links, although it has its major river. It's the banditry that surrounds the mining activities is a big factor. And you can see that in Sudan, which has gold mines, and the banditry that surrounded these mines, and the kleptocracy has ultimately caused rivalry for state power, for government, and created civil war. So it's fertile ground, kleptocracy, for disruptions of the peace and diversion of resources away from the standard government expenditures of modest defense, welfare, education, health. These gradually go by the board, and with it, GDP and the wealth of nations. So inevitably, tariffs have been associated with this kleptocracy, with rent seeking, and the hazards are sort of well known. And I've touched on how the benefits are concentrated, but the costs are dispersed among the population. Interestingly, on Congo, as we've seen elsewhere, and it's really quite humorous. So when you think about it, I'm thinking of the current US president railing against windmills and wind turbines, and you think, well, why would that be? I wonder why that would be. Why would he prefer his buddies in the fossil fuel business? And in part, the answer, human nature being as it is rent seeking. It's not too far-fetched to say that that individual cannot see a way of getting rent out of windmills. So he doesn't really like them. He's not really interested. He's not the public benefit of wind farms. It just passes him by because he can't see what's in it for him and his circle. Fortunately, the US, as I say, has its strong institutions, and it can accommodate a kleptocrat and those who surround him. But inevitably, it erodes society and this sort of morality, which, as we've seen, is so important, albeit in the background. It's very important in establishing and maintaining human capital. Now, the hopeful thing about, we've sort of ventured now into why certain industries are not popular with the kleptocrats who are with us, who are always with us. When you look, for example, at Kenya, which has gone from 0% renewables to nearly 100% renewables, Kenya has seen a remarkable rise in living standards and GDP as a result. So maybe that's the way the Congo will go, as the energy imbalances and respond to their various price signals. Maybe we'll see that change in the Congo, and how these sort of the various toll booths, which create problems and which impede development and make life more difficult for the population, become less important, and then institutions can develop that are based not on banditry. So we know that, to summarize, we know that it's the domestic importing businesses and domestic consumers that are paying this tax. We know arbitrary tax tariff regimes expand the discretionary power of executive officials over the private economy, over the operation of the free market and competitive markets. And if a society wishes to insulate it from this, fortunately, for as long as we have term limits, we have a certain measure of insulation. But in the meantime, we can be giving thought to strict transparency. Again, that's one advantage in the US. You can see in plain sight what's going on. That doesn't make it any the less reprehensible and any the less foolish. The institutional checks and balances in the US are strong. There is open competition. If it's one thing the US likes, it's a winner and competition, and that's not going to change. So I hope that's, with a nod to Adam Smith, hopefully a little bit of knowledge of this elite rent extraction is a first step in ensuring the wealth of nations serves the public rather than the predatory few. See you next time.